I never expected to get famous. I started posting videos just for fun, like everyone else. It was simple stuff. Outfits of the day, trying out weird food trends, little updates about my life. I wasn't trying to be anything special. I was just bored, and it felt like something to do. Then one day, everything changed. It started with one video. I remember it because I almost didn't post it. It was just me talking about this strange dream I'd had. I don't even know why I decided to share it. In the dream, I was standing in a massive empty room with walls that glowed faintly blue. There were shapes in the distance, tall, thin figures that seemed to be watching me. I couldn't move, but I didn't feel scared either. It was like they were waiting for something. When I woke up, the details were already fading, but the feeling stuck with me. So I grabbed my phone and recorded a quick video about it. I thought it was weird enough that some people might find it interesting, but nothing more than that. The next morning, it had over 1 million views. At first, I thought it was a glitch. I refreshed the app a dozen times, but the number kept climbing. The comments were pouring in, thousands of them. People were saying they'd had similar dreams, that they'd seen the same blue room, the same figures. Others said the way I described it felt familiar, even though they couldn't explain why. That's when my follower count started exploding. Every time I refreshed, there were more. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. Within a week, I was at 1 million. Brands started reaching out, offering sponsorships. My inbox was full of messages from people saying they felt like they knew me, like I'd spoken directly to them. It felt unreal. I kept telling myself it was just luck, that the algorithm had picked up my video and run with it. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The dreams didn't stop. If anything, they got more vivid. I started seeing the figures more clearly. They were tall, with elongated limbs and smooth, featureless faces. Their skin shimmered like it was made of liquid metal. They didn't speak, but I could feel them, like their thoughts were pressing into mine. They wanted something from me, but I didn't know what. The strange thing was, the more I dreamed about them, the more my followers grew. Every time I woke up, I'd check my phone, and there would be thousands more people watching me. My videos were trending constantly, even the ones that didn't seem special. I could post a 30-second clip of me brushing my hair, and it would get millions of views. People started calling me relatable and authentic. They said they felt connected to me, like I was different from other influencers. I didn't feel different. I felt confused. Then the messages started. At first, they were just weird comments on my posts. Things like, "They're watching," or "You're the bridge." I thought it was some kind of internet joke I didn't understand. But then I started getting emails. They didn't have subject lines or sender names, just blocks of text that didn't make sense. "The connection is stabilizing. Do not resist. You are the prototype. The others will follow. The message must be delivered." I deleted them, but they kept coming. No matter how many times I blocked the addresses, they always found a way through. One night, I woke up to a sound. It wasn't loud, just a faint hum, but it made my skin crawl. I looked around my room, but everything seemed normal. My phone was on the nightstand, the screen glowing faintly. There was a new notification, another email. This one was different. It wasn't text, it was a video. It started with static, then cut to a view of the blue room from my dreams. The camera was moving, like someone was walking through the space. The figures were there, standing in a circle, their heads tilted toward the camera. One of them raised a hand, and the screen went black. When it came back, I was in the video. Not a recording of me, standing in the blue room, wearing the same pajamas I had on in bed. I was frozen, staring blankly ahead. One of the figures stepped closer, reaching out toward me, and the video ended. I threw my phone across the room. The next day, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just a nightmare, that my brain was messing with me. But when I opened the app, there was a new video on my account. I hadn't posted it. It was the same video from the email, the blue room, the figures, me standing among them. It already had 10 million views. I panicked. I tried to delete it, but the app wouldn't let me. Every time I refreshed, the views climbed higher. The comments were full of people saying they'd had dreams about the room, that they'd seen the figures too. Some of them said they'd seen me there. That was when I realized this wasn't just about me. I didn't know what to do. I thought about quitting, deleting my account, disappearing completely. But it didn't feel like that would stop anything. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than me. The dreams kept coming, but they were different now. The figures weren't just watching me, they were showing me things. Cities covered in light, strange machines that moved like they were alive, stars I didn't recognize. I felt their thoughts more clearly, like they were trying to teach me something. They called it the bridge, and I was the key. I don't remember how I finally got out. One night, the dream stopped. The figures were gone, and the blue room faded away. My follower count leveled off, and the strange comments disappeared. It was like they decided I wasn't useful anymore. I still don't know what they wanted. Maybe they were testing me, or maybe I failed their test. All I know is they're still out there, watching, waiting for someone else to become their bridge. I've stopped posting. I don't even use social media anymore. Sometimes I wonder if they're still keeping an eye on me, but I try not to think about it. The blue room is gone, and I'm just glad I got out alive. I sell roasted chestnuts on a busy street corner in the city. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills. My cart sits at the intersection of two crowded streets where office workers rush past, parents wrangle their kids, and tourists snap pictures of everything. I like the noise and the movement. It makes the day go faster. Most people don't stick around long. Just grab a paper bag of chestnuts, maybe smile, maybe nod, and keep going. But some nights, the crowd thins out and things get strange. It started about 3 weeks ago. A man approached the cart, tall and thin, wearing a dark coat. He didn't say anything, just stood there staring at me. His face was pale, and his eyes were strange, too wide, too shiny. I thought maybe he didn't speak English, so I smiled and held up a bag of chestnuts. "One bag?" I asked. He didn't respond, just tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out exact change, and placed it on the counter. I handed him the chestnuts, and he walked away without a word. At first, I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people are quiet, especially in the city. But then the next night, he came back. Same thing. No words, no expression, just exact change, and that same intense stare. It wasn't just him either. 2 nights later, a woman showed up. She looked a lot like the man, tall, pale, with that same strange shine in her eyes. She didn't speak, just stared at me like I was a puzzle she was trying to solve. She paid with exact change and left without eating the chestnuts. That's when I started to notice something weird. These customers didn't move like other people. Their steps were too smooth, like they were gliding instead of walking. And their faces, they didn't have any of the little twitches or movements that make people look alive. They were too still, like mannequins. By the end of the week, there were more of them. Not every night, but often enough that I noticed. They always came alone, always silent, always with exact change. None of them ate the chestnuts, at least not that I saw. I started to feel uneasy, but I couldn't explain why. They didn't do anything wrong. They just stood there, staring. Then one night, something happened that I couldn't ignore. It was a slow evening, with barely anyone around. One of the quiet ones, a man in a grey scarf, came up to the cart. He reached into his pocket for change, but before he pulled it out, I had this strange feeling in my head. It's hard to describe. It was like a pressure, like someone was pushing on my thoughts, trying to dig through them. I froze, my hand hovering over the chestnuts. The pressure got stronger, and suddenly I wasn't just thinking my own thoughts anymore. I was thinking his thoughts too, or maybe he was thinking mine. I couldn't tell. There weren't words exactly, just impressions, questions, curiosity. I felt like he was looking at my memories, flipping through them like pages in a book. I tried to speak, but my mouth wouldn't work. My mind felt like it was split open, and all my private thoughts were spilling out. I thought about my sister, who I hadn't called in weeks. I thought about the time I accidentally shortchanged a customer and felt too embarrassed to fix it. I thought about the scar on my hand from when I burned it on the cart stove. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the pressure was gone. The man handed me his coins, took the chestnuts, and walked away like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the moment in my head, trying to make sense of it. The way he stared at me, the way it felt like he knew me in a way no one ever should. I couldn't explain it, but I knew one thing for sure. They weren't normal. Over the next few nights, I started watching them more closely. They never spoke to anyone, never stayed in one place for long. They didn't seem to interact with each other either. But every time one of them came to my cart, I felt that same pressure in my head. It was softer, less overwhelming, but still there, like they were skimming the surface of my thoughts, not digging too deep. One night, I decided to test it. I thought about something random, an old cartoon I used to watch as a kid. I focused on the theme song, humming it in my head as I handed a bag of chestnuts to one of them. The figure tilted its head just slightly, like it had heard me. Then it walked away. I knew then that they were reading my thoughts. They didn't need to talk, because they already knew what I was going to say. The realization made my skin crawl. What else had they seen? What else did they know? I started feeling paranoid. Every time I saw one of them, I tried to block out my thoughts, to keep my mind blank. But it's impossible not to think. The more I tried, the more I felt like they were in control, like they were leading my thoughts where they wanted them to go. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. A woman approached the cart, tall, pale, silent. I slammed my hand on the counter and said, "What do you want from me?" She didn't flinch. Her eyes met mine, and for a second, I felt that pressure again, stronger than ever. Then, just as quickly, it disappeared. She reached into her pocket, placed exact change on the counter, and walked away without taking the chestnuts. I almost quit that night. I packed up the cart and went home, shaking. But as scared as I was, I couldn't stop thinking about them. Who were they? What were they doing here? And why did they keep coming to me? The next night, I decided to confront them. I waited until one of them showed up, a man in a black coat. When he handed me the coins, I grabbed his wrist. It felt cold, too cold, like touching ice. "Why are you here? What are you looking for?" He didn't speak, but I felt the answer in my head. It wasn't words exactly, but a feeling. Curiosity. Observation. He wasn't here to hurt me. None of them were. They were just studying, watching how people lived, how we thought. They didn't understand speech, so they used thoughts instead. To them, it was normal. But to me, it felt like a violation. The man pulled his hand away and walked off without another word or thought. That was the last night I saw them. It's been 2 weeks, and they haven't come back. But I can't stop thinking about them, about the way they peeled back my mind like a book. They didn't hurt me, but they left something behind. A question I can't answer. What do we owe to privacy, to consent, when it comes to beings who don't see the world the way we do? I still sell chestnuts on the same corner, but every time I see a tall figure in the crowd, my heart skips a beat. I don't know if they'll come back, but if they do, I'll be ready. At least, I hope I will be. The forest held its breath as Maria stepped out of her car that October evening. She'd driven 3 hours north from Phoenix to this remote campground, seeking the kind of silence that only the wilderness could provide. What she found instead would haunt her for the rest of her life. Maria was a nurse practitioner, methodical by nature, skeptical by training. She didn't believe in ghosts or UFOs or anything that couldn't be measured and documented. But sometimes the universe has a way of challenging our most fundamental assumptions about reality. She'd chosen Mogollon Rim for her solo camping trip because of its reputation for dark skies and pristine wilderness. The nearest town was 40 miles away, and cell service died long before you reached the tree line. It was exactly the kind of isolation she craved after months of hospital shifts and urban chaos. The campsite she selected sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering ponderosa pines. As twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Maria set up her tent with practiced efficiency. She built a small fire, heated a can of soup, and settled into her camping chair with a book and a cup of tea. It was then that she noticed the silence, not the peaceful quiet of nature, but something deeper, something wrong. The usual chorus of evening sounds, crickets, owls, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, had simply stopped. Even the wind had died, leaving the forest in an unnatural hush that made her skin crawl. Maria lowered her book and listened. The only sound was the soft crackle of her campfire and her own breathing. She told herself it was nothing, just one of those moments when nature pauses. But minutes passed, and still the silence stretched on. That's when she saw the light. At first, it was just a faint glow filtering through the trees to the west. Maria assumed it was another camper, perhaps someone arriving late and setting up by flashlight. But as she watched, the light grew brighter and began to move in a way that made no sense. It wasn't the erratic beam of a flashlight or the steady glow of a lantern. This light pulsed with a rhythm all its own, shifting from white to blue to an almost greenish hue, and it was rising, lifting above the treetops in complete silence. Maria stood up, her book falling forgotten to the ground. The light hovered about 100 feet above the forest canopy, perfectly still now, except for that gentle pulsing. It was roughly circular, maybe 30 feet across, and emanated a soft luminescence that seemed to bend the very air around it. Her rational mind scrambled for explanations. A helicopter? No sound? A weather balloon? Wrong shape? Wrong behavior? Some kind of military aircraft? Possible, but this was civilian airspace, and she'd never heard of anything that could hover so silently. As she watched, transfixed, the object began to descend. Slowly, deliberately, it lowered itself toward her campsite. The light grew brighter as it approached, but it wasn't harsh or blinding. Instead, it seemed almost welcoming, like moonlight filtered through water. Maria's training told her to run, to get in her car and drive away as fast as possible. But something kept her rooted in place. Not fear, exactly, but a strange sense of inevitability, as if this moment had been waiting for her all her life. The craft, and she could no longer deny that's what it was, settled into the clearing about 50 yards from her campsite. It made no sound as it touched down, no rush of displaced air, no mechanical noise, just that soft, rhythmic pulsing of light that seemed to sync with her own heartbeat. Up close, she could see that it wasn't solid in any conventional sense. The surface appeared to flow like liquid mercury, constantly shifting and reshaping itself. There were no visible seams, no windows, no obvious means of propulsion. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. For several minutes, nothing happened. Maria stood frozen beside her dying campfire, staring at the impossible thing that had landed in her campsite. The silence was absolute now, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then a section of the craft's surface began to change. What had been smooth and featureless started to pucker and fold inward, creating an opening that expanded until it was large enough for a person to walk through. No door had opened. The craft had simply rearranged itself. A figure appeared in the doorway. It was humanoid, but clearly not human. Tall and slender, with pale, almost translucent skin that seemed to glow faintly in the craft's light. Its head was larger than a human's, with enormous dark eyes that reflected the surrounding illumination like black mirrors. It wore no clothing that Maria could discern, but its skin had a smooth, almost artificial quality, as if it were wearing a second skin made of living light. The being stepped out of the craft and began walking toward her. Its movements were fluid, graceful, almost floating. As it approached, Maria felt a strange calm descending over her. The fear that should have been overwhelming her simply wasn't there. Instead, she felt curious, expectant, as if she were about to receive an answer to a question she'd been asking her entire life without knowing it. The being stopped about 10 feet away from her and tilted its head slightly, studying her with those impossibly large eyes. When it spoke, Maria heard no sound, but the words formed clearly in her mind. "We have been waiting for you." The voice was neither male nor female, neither old nor young. It simply was, like the sound of wind through leaves or water over stones, natural and eternal. "Waiting for me?" Maria found herself responding, though she wasn't sure if she spoke aloud or simply thought the words. "You are the bridge," the being replied, "between what is and what will be. We have watched your kind for so long, waiting for the right moment, the right person. You have the gift of healing, but more than that, you have the capacity to understand." Images began flowing into Maria's mind, not her own memories, but something else entirely. She saw Earth from space, but not as she'd ever seen it in photographs. This view was alive, pulsing with energy patterns that revealed the planet as a living organism. She saw humanity as the beings saw them, not as individuals, but as part of a vast, interconnected web of consciousness that spanned the globe. She saw other worlds, other civilizations that had reached this same crossroads. Some had evolved beyond their physical forms, becoming beings of pure energy and thought. Others had destroyed themselves, their worlds left barren and lifeless. And a few, a precious few, had found the balance, learning to harmonize their technology with their spirituality, their individuality with their collective consciousness. "Your species stands at this threshold now," the being continued. "The choices made in the coming years will determine which path you follow. We cannot interfere directly, but we can offer guidance to those who are ready to receive it." "Why me?" Maria asked. "I'm nobody special. I'm just a nurse." The being's expression, if it could be called that, seemed to soften. "You heal others. You ease suffering. You bridge the gap between fear and hope every day in your work. These qualities make you more special than you know." More images flowed through her mind. She saw herself in the hospital, holding the hand of a dying patient, and understood for the first time that her presence had done more than provide comfort. It had actually eased the transition from life to death, helping the person's consciousness move peacefully to whatever came next. She saw herself talking to frightened patients before surgery, and realized that her words had literally changed their brain chemistry, reducing stress hormones and improving their chances of survival. She had always attributed these things to good bedside manner, but now she understood they were something more profound. "You are what we call a connector," the being explained. "One who can touch the consciousness of others and help them heal not just physically, but spiritually. Your species needs such people now more than ever." The being extended what might have been a hand, long, delicate fingers that seemed to be made of the same flowing light as its skin. "Will you accept this gift? The ability to see beyond the veil, to help others understand that they are not alone in the universe?" Maria stared at the offered hand. Every rational part of her mind screamed warnings. This was impossible. This was dangerous. This would change everything about her life, her understanding of reality itself. But beneath the fear, she felt something else, a deep recognition, as if this moment had been written into her DNA long before she was born. This was why she had become a healer. This was why she had always felt slightly out of step with the world around her. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Slowly, she reached out and took the being's hand. The moment their skin touched, the world exploded into sensation. Not pain, but an overwhelming rush of connection. She felt her consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of her individual mind, touching something vast and ancient and infinitely compassionate. She understood, in that instant, that she was part of something so much larger than herself, a network of consciousness that spanned galaxies and dimensions. She saw the true nature of the universe, not empty space punctuated by isolated worlds, but a living tapestry of interconnected awareness. Every star, every planet, every form of life was a note in a cosmic symphony of unimaginable beauty and complexity, and she saw her role in it, not as a chosen one or a prophet, but as a translator, someone who could help others understand that the fear and isolation they felt was an illusion, that consciousness itself was the fundamental force of the universe, and that every being, human or otherwise, was a precious thread in the cosmic web. The vision lasted only seconds, but it contained lifetimes of understanding. When it ended, Maria found herself standing alone in the clearing. The craft was gone, the being was gone, and the normal sounds of the forest had returned. But she was forever changed. She looked down at her hand, the one that had touched the being. There was no mark, no physical sign of what had occurred, but she could feel the difference inside herself, a new awareness, a deeper connection to the world around her. Over the weeks and months that followed, Maria found that her ability to help patients had indeed been enhanced. She could sense their pain more acutely, understand their fears more deeply, and offer comfort that seemed to reach their very souls. She began to see auras around people, not visible light, but patterns of energy that revealed their emotional and spiritual states. And sometimes, late at night when she was alone, she would feel that presence again, not the being itself, but the vast network of consciousness she had touched. It was always there, she realized, waiting for anyone ready to acknowledge it. She never spoke publicly about her encounter. Who would believe her? But she found subtle ways to share what she had learned. A word of comfort to a grieving family that helped them understand their loved one lived on in ways beyond physical death. A touch that seemed to accelerate healing in ways that baffled doctors. A presence that made the most frightened patients feel suddenly, inexplicably safe. Maria had become what the being called her, a bridge. Between this world and the next, between fear and understanding, between the illusion of separation and the reality of connection. And in quiet moments, when she looked up at the stars, she would remember that night in the forest and know with absolute certainty that we are not alone. We never have been. We are all part of something magnificent and eternal, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get a glimpse of just how beautiful that really is. The encounter changed everything and nothing. Maria still worked her shifts at the hospital, still lived in her small apartment, still went camping when she could. But now she moved through the world with a deeper purpose, carrying within her the knowledge that every act of healing, every moment of compassion, every bridge built between one consciousness and another was part of a cosmic dance that had been going on since the beginning of time. And sometimes, just sometimes, when she was helping someone transition from fear to peace, from sickness to health, from despair to hope, she would feel that presence again, vast, ancient, and infinitely loving, reminding her that the work of healing is the most sacred work in the universe. As you drift off to sleep tonight,
Perhaps you'll dream of that forest clearing, of lights that pulse with the rhythm of the cosmos, of beings who see not our differences, but our connections.
And maybe, in your dreams, you'll remember what Maria learned that night, that every one of us is a bridge, every one of us is a healer, and every one of us is part of something so beautiful and vast that our minds can barely comprehend it. The forest remembers, the stars remember, and somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking, between the known and the unknown, that truth waits patiently for anyone ready to embrace it. Sweet dreams. The transmission came through at 3:47 a.m. on a frequency that shouldn't have existed. Dr. Sarah Chen had been monitoring deep space communications for NASA's SETI program for nearly 2 decades, but she'd never encountered anything like this. The signal wasn't random cosmic noise or the usual patterns they tracked from pulsars and quasars. This was structured, deliberate, and impossibly complex. She sat alone in the control room at the Arecibo Observatory, the massive radio telescope pointed toward a section of sky that had been quiet for months. The coffee in her mug had gone cold hours ago, but she couldn't pull herself away from the data streaming across her screens. The signal had started as a whisper, barely detectable above the background radiation. But over the past 6 hours, it had grown stronger, more focused, as if something was adjusting its broadcast to reach Earth with perfect clarity. Sarah's hands trembled as she adjusted the receivers, trying to isolate the transmission. The patterns were unlike anything in their databases, not the simple mathematical sequences that SETI had been hoping to find for decades, but something far more sophisticated. Layered harmonics that seemed to shift and evolve in real time, carrying information in ways that human technology was only beginning to understand. She thought about calling her supervisor, Dr. Martinez, but something held her back. This felt too important, too fragile to risk interference from bureaucracy and protocol. Instead, she activated the recording systems and began running the signal through every analysis program they had. The first breakthrough came when she fed the transmission through their pattern recognition software. Hidden within the complex harmonics were mathematical constants: pi, the golden ratio, prime number sequences. But these weren't simple broadcasts of known values. They were being used as a foundation for something much more elaborate. As the hours passed, Sarah began to see structure emerging from the chaos. The signal wasn't just carrying information, it was teaching her how to decode it. Each mathematical constant served as a key to unlock deeper layers of meaning, like a cosmic Rosetta Stone that gradually revealed its secrets to anyone patient enough to listen. By dawn, she had isolated 17 distinct information channels within the transmission. Some carried what appeared to be technical specifications, diagrams of technologies that seemed to violate known physics. Others contained sequences that looked almost biological, like genetic codes for organisms that had never existed on Earth. But it was the 18th channel that made her breath catch in her throat. When she finally cracked its encoding, the data resolved into something impossible, a 3-dimensional map of local space showing not just the positions of stars and planets, but the locations of artificial structures, stations, ships, installations, evidence of a vast civilization that had been operating in humanity's cosmic neighborhood for millennia. Earth appeared on the map as a small blue dot, but it wasn't unmarked. Surrounding the planet were dozens of smaller objects, moving in precise orbital patterns that didn't match any known satellites or space debris. They were being watched, monitored, studied by something that had technology far beyond human understanding. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Dr. Martinez. She'd been so absorbed in the data that she hadn't noticed the sun coming up. Her shift had ended hours ago, but she couldn't leave. Not now. "Chen, are you still there? Your replacement says you haven't checked in." She stared at the screens, at the impossible map, still rotating slowly in 3 dimensions. "Dr. Martinez, I need you to come in, now, and bring the emergency protocols."
Sarah, what's wrong? You sound... Just come, and don't contact anyone else until you've seen this. The line went quiet for a moment. Dr. Martinez had known her long enough to recognize when she was serious. I'll be there in 20 minutes. As she waited, Sarah continued analyzing the transmission. The signal was growing stronger, more focused, as if it was homing in on their location. She realized with growing certainty that this wasn't just a broadcast. It was a response.
For decades, SETI had been sending signals into space, hoping for a reply. Radio transmissions, mathematical sequences, even music and images representing human culture. They'd been shouting into the cosmic dark, announcing their presence to anyone who might be listening. Now, finally, something was answering back. But as Sarah studied the data, a chilling thought occurred to her. The transmission contained detailed information about Earth's technology, its military capabilities, even the locations of major population centers. This wasn't just first contact, it was reconnaissance. The beings who had sent this signal knew everything about humanity. They'd been watching, learning, preparing, and now they were ready to make contact on their terms. Dr. Martinez arrived to find Sarah still hunched over her workstation, her eyes red from hours of staring at screens. The data she showed him left him speechless. Within an hour, they had contacted the highest levels of government, triggering protocols that had been in place since the 1950s, but never used. But even as secure phone lines buzzed with activity and black SUVs began arriving at the observatory, the transmission continued, growing stronger, more insistent, as if it knew it had finally captured humanity's attention. Sarah watched the signal strength indicators climb steadily upward and realized, with a mixture of terror and wonder, that this was just the beginning. Whatever was out there, whatever had been watching and waiting in the darkness between stars, was finally ready to step into the light. The age of humanity's cosmic isolation was about to end, and Sarah Chen, alone in a radio telescope facility in Puerto Rico, had become the first human being to hear the universe calling back. The transmission came through at exactly 3:17 a.m., crackling across the emergency frequencies like static electricity before a storm. Sarah Chen had been working the overnight shift at the Deep Space Communications Array for 6 months, monitoring the endless chatter between satellites and ground stations. Most nights passed in comfortable silence, broken only by routine data packets and the occasional solar interference. But this was different. The signal wasn't from any known satellite or terrestrial source. It pulsed with a rhythmic precision that made Sarah's skin crawl, each burst lasting exactly 1.7 seconds with 4.3-second intervals between transmissions. She leaned forward in her chair, adjusting the sensitivity on her equipment, wondering if she was picking up some classified military operation. The pattern was too deliberate to be random, too complex to be natural interference. As she isolated the frequency and ran it through the decryption software, the hair on her arms began to stand up. The signal was coming from a point in space beyond our solar system, from the direction of the Vega constellation. Sarah had been trained to follow protocol. Any anomalous signals were to be reported immediately to her supervisor. But something about this transmission made her hesitate. The mathematical precision of it, the way it seemed to pulse in harmony with her own heartbeat. She found herself listening to it for nearly an hour, hypnotized by its alien rhythm. When she finally ran the signal through the pattern analysis program, her coffee mug slipped from her trembling fingers. The transmission wasn't random electromagnetic noise. It was structured, layered with information. It was a message. The first layer was simple: prime numbers, mathematical constants, the kind of universal language that scientists had theorized aliens might use to establish communication. But as her computers dug deeper into the signal's architecture, more complex patterns emerged. Star charts, atomic structures, and underneath it all, something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Detailed information about Earth. Not just our planet's physical characteristics, but data about our cities, our population, our technology, information that should have been impossible for any distant civilization to possess. Sarah stared at her screens as streams of decoded data flowed past. Radio telescope locations, satellite trajectories, military installations. The beings who had sent this transmission didn't just know about Earth. They had been watching us, studying us, for a very long time. Her hands shook as she reached for the red phone that would connect her directly to the facility director. But as her fingers touched the receiver, the transmission changed. The steady pulse quickened, and new information began flooding through the decryption program. What she saw next made her sink back into her chair, overwhelmed by the implications. The signal wasn't just a message, it was a countdown. And according to the alien mathematics scrolling across her screen, humanity had less than 96 hours before something arrived. Sarah never made that phone call. By morning, she would be gone, leaving only her empty chair and a computer screen filled with data that would change everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. The transmission continued for 3 more days, broadcasting its countdown to anyone with the equipment to receive it. But Sarah Chen was no longer there to listen. She had become part of something far larger than a simple radio message from the stars. The last entry in her logbook, written in handwriting that seemed somehow different from her usual script, contained only 7 words. "They're not coming. They're already here." I was stationed at a remote radar facility in northern Alaska, one of those places where the nearest town is 3 hours away and the aurora borealis dances across the sky most nights. The isolation gets to you after a while, but you learn to appreciate the silence, the endless wilderness, and the sense that you're watching over something important. My name's Marcus, and I'd been working the overnight shift at the facility for about 8 months when it happened. The job was straightforward: monitor air traffic, track weather patterns, and report anything unusual to command. Most nights, the only things moving across my screens were commercial flights following established routes, or the occasional military transport. It was mid-February, one of those brutal Arctic nights where the temperature drops to -40 and the wind cuts through you like a blade. I was alone in the control room, sipping coffee that had gone cold hours ago, when something appeared on my radar that shouldn't have been there. At first, I thought it was a glitch, a single contact, moving east to west at an altitude of roughly 60,000 feet. No transponder signal, no flight plan filed, nothing in our system indicating any aircraft in that airspace. I ran a diagnostic on the equipment, but everything checked out normal. The contact wasn't moving like any aircraft I'd ever tracked. It would accelerate to impossible speeds, then stop completely, hovering in place for several minutes before resuming movement. The radar showed it covering distances that should have taken hours in a matter of seconds. I tried raising it on radio. "Unknown aircraft at bearing 270, altitude 60,000. Please identify yourself." Nothing. I repeated the call several times, switching frequencies, but received no response. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The contact was heading directly toward our facility. I immediately contacted my supervisor, Staff Sergeant Williams, who was sleeping in the quarters building. His voice was groggy when he answered, but it sharpened quickly when I explained what I was seeing. "Are you certain it's not one of ours?" he asked. "Negative, Sergeant. No filed flight plan, no transponder, and the movement pattern is unusual." Williams arrived at the control room within minutes, his breath visible in the frigid air. He studied the radar screen, his expression growing more concerned as he watched the contact's erratic movements. "How long has it been out there?" he asked. "About 20 minutes. It's been maintaining course toward our position." As we watched, the contact came to a complete stop, approximately 10 miles northeast of our facility. It held position there, motionless, for nearly an hour. Williams tried contacting higher command, but our communications were experiencing interference, static and strange tonal patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm. Then, Without warning, the radar contact simply vanished. Not off the edge of the screen, not descending or ascending beyond our range. It just disappeared, as if it had never been there at all. Williams and I exchanged glances. "Equipment malfunction?" he suggested, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. I was about to agree when we heard it, a low, thrumming sound coming from outside. It wasn't mechanical, more like a deep vibration that seemed to resonate through the building itself. The lights in the control room flickered, and several pieces of equipment briefly went offline before returning to normal. Williams grabbed his parka and headed for the door. "Stay here and monitor the radar. If anything else shows up, call me immediately." I watched through the window as he stepped outside, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the swirling snow, but I could see his posture stiffen as he looked up at the sky. He stood there for several minutes, completely motionless, before slowly walking back toward the building. When he came back inside, his face was pale, and his hands were shaking slightly as he removed his gloves. "What did you see?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the coffee pot and poured himself a cup, his movements deliberate and careful, as if he was trying to maintain his composure. "Nothing," he finally said. "Just snow and wind." But something in his voice told me he was lying. The rest of the night passed without incident. No more radar contacts, no more strange sounds. When the day shift arrived, Williams briefed them on the equipment issues we'd experienced, but made no mention of the unidentified contact. As I was preparing to leave, he pulled me aside. "What happened tonight?" he said quietly. "We're going to keep between us for now. I need to make some calls, see if anyone else picked up anything unusual." I nodded, understanding the implications. In the military, you learn when to ask questions and when to simply follow orders. Over the next few days, I tried to put the incident out of my mind, but it wasn't easy. Every time I looked at the radar screen, I found myself scanning for unusual contacts. Every strange sound outside made me pause and listen more carefully. About a week later, Williams approached me during my shift. "I've been in contact with other facilities in the region," he said. 3 different stations reported similar incidents over the past month. Unknown contacts moving at impossible speeds, sudden equipment malfunctions, and then nothing. "What does command say about it?" "Officially, atmospheric anomalies and equipment glitches." He paused. "Unofficially, they're very interested in any additional sightings." That night, as I sat alone in the control room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not by human eyes, but by something else. Something that operated by rules we didn't understand. The aurora was particularly active that evening, green and purple curtains of light dancing across the sky. Beautiful, but somehow ominous given recent events. I found myself wondering if what we'd seen was connected to the natural phenomena, or if it was something else entirely. Around 3 in the morning, the radar picked up another contact. This time, I was ready. I immediately noted the time, position, and movement pattern, documenting everything as thoroughly as possible. The contact followed a similar pattern to the previous sighting: impossible speeds, sudden stops, erratic movement that defied conventional aerodynamics. But this time, I also noticed something else. As the contact moved across the screen, it seemed to be following the same path as the aurora overhead. When the lights shifted direction, so did the radar contact, as if they were somehow connected. I called Williams, who arrived within minutes. Together, we watched as the contact performed maneuvers that would have been lethal to any human pilot. G-forces that should have torn apart any known aircraft seemed to have no effect on whatever we were tracking. "Are you recording this?" Williams asked. "Everything's being logged automatically," I confirmed. The contact continued its strange dance for nearly 2 hours before finally disappearing, just as suddenly as it had appeared. But this time, the equipment interference was more pronounced. Communications went down completely for several minutes, and the facility's backup generator kicked in when our main power fluctuated. The next morning, Williams received orders to report to headquarters in Anchorage. He was gone for 3 days, and when he returned, he seemed different, more cautious, more deliberate in his words. "What did they say?" I asked. "They're taking it seriously," he replied. "More seriously than I expected. They want us to maintain detailed logs of any future incidents, but we're not to discuss this with anyone outside the immediate chain of command." Over the following weeks, the sightings became more frequent. Other personnel at the facility began reporting strange lights in the sky, equipment malfunctions, and an overall sense of unease. But officially, nothing unusual was happening. I started keeping a personal log, documenting not just the radar contacts, but the atmospheric conditions, equipment behavior, and the reactions of the other personnel. Patterns began to emerge. The sightings were more frequent during periods of high aurora activity, and they seemed to coincide with certain weather patterns. One night in March, everything came to a head. I was tracking multiple contacts, at least 6 distinct objects moving in what appeared to be a coordinated formation. They weren't just randomly flying around. They were executing precise maneuvers, maintaining specific distances from each other, operating as a unit. Williams was in the control room with me, along with 2 other technicians who had been called in to monitor the equipment. We watched in fascination and growing unease as the formation executed turns that would have been impossible for any known aircraft. "Are they communicating with each other?" one of the technicians asked. "Has to be," Williams replied. "That level of coordination requires constant communication." But our radio equipment wasn't picking up any transmissions. Whatever these objects were, they were operating on frequencies or using methods we couldn't detect. Then, one of the contacts broke formation and began heading directly toward our facility. As it approached, the interference in our equipment intensified. Radar screens flickered, radio communications were overwhelmed by static, and the lights in the building began to strobe. "It's directly overhead," I reported, though the radar screen was now too distorted to provide accurate information. Williams stepped outside, and this time I followed him. The aurora was blazing overhead, more intense than I'd ever seen it. But there was something else, a darker area in the lights, a shadow that seemed to move independently of the natural phenomena. "Do you see it?" Williams whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. The shadow was massive, easily the size of a football field, and it was hovering silently above us. No sound, no visible means of propulsion, just a presence that seemed to press down on us like a physical weight. We stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow was gone. The aurora returned to its normal patterns, and the equipment inside the facility gradually returned to normal operation. When we went back inside, the other technicians were staring at their instruments in confusion. "Everything just went haywire," one of them said. "Complete system failure for about 5 minutes, then everything came back online like nothing happened." Williams and I exchanged glances, but said nothing. The next day, a team of investigators arrived from headquarters. They interviewed each of us separately, examined all the equipment, and reviewed every piece of recorded data. Their conclusion was predictable: equipment malfunction caused by solar activity and electromagnetic interference from the aurora. But I knew what I'd seen. We all did. The sightings continued sporadically over the next few months, but they were never as dramatic as that night in March. Gradually, they became just another part of the job, something unusual that happened sometimes, like particularly severe weather or equipment glitches. I finished my tour in Alaska and was transferred to a facility in the lower 48. The work was similar, but the skies were different. No aurora, no vast wilderness, no sense of being at the edge of the known world. But sometimes, during quiet nights, when I'm monitoring the radar screens, I find myself thinking about those lights in the Alaskan sky. Whatever they were, wherever they came from, they were real. And somewhere up there, beyond the reach of our instruments and our understanding, they might still be watching. The official reports probably buried the whole thing under classifications and technical explanations. But the people who were there, who saw what we saw, we know the truth. We know that we're not alone, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the watchers let themselves be seen. I was working the night shift at a small radio tower about 40 miles outside of Denver. Nothing too exciting, just monitoring equipment and making sure everything stayed online. The tower was isolated, surrounded by empty plains and scattered farmhouses. Most nights were quiet, just me and the hum of electronics, occasionally checking gauges or adjusting settings when something drifted out of range. My name's Marcus, and I'd been doing this job for about 3 years. The pay was decent, and I didn't mind the solitude. I'd bring books, sometimes catch up on podcasts during the slower hours. My dog Rex, a German Shepherd mix, would come with me most nights. He was good company and helped with the loneliness. It was around 2 in the morning when things started getting strange. I was reviewing the night's logs when Rex suddenly stood up, ears alert, staring toward the window. He didn't bark, which was unusual for him. He just stood there, perfectly still, watching something I couldn't see. I walked over to check what had caught his attention. Outside, the landscape looked normal. Empty fields stretched toward the horizon, dotted with a few distant lights from farmhouses. The moon was about half full, casting everything in pale silver. Nothing seemed out of place. But Rex wouldn't relax. He kept staring, his whole body tense like he was tracking something moving just beyond my vision. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the area around the tower. The night was completely still. No wind, no animals, just that heavy quiet you get in the middle of nowhere. That's when I noticed the radio equipment acting up. The main transmitter was picking up interference, a low static that wasn't coming from any of our usual sources. I went back inside to check the settings, thinking maybe we were getting crosstalk from another station. But the frequency was clean on our end. The interference was coming from somewhere else. I tried adjusting the filters, but the static persisted. It had this rhythmic quality, like pulses or patterns underneath the white noise. I'd never heard anything like it. Rex was still standing by the window, growling softly now, his hackles raised. Then the lights appeared. At first, I thought they were aircraft. 3 bright points of light moving slowly across the sky, maybe a mile or 2 away. But their formation was too perfect, too rigid. They moved together like they were connected, maintaining exact distances from each other. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on them. The lights weren't blinking like navigation lights should. They were steady, intense, and they cast this strange blue-white glow that seemed to illuminate the clouds around them. As I watched, they stopped moving and just hovered there, perfectly motionless. The radio interference was getting stronger. I could hear distinct patterns now, almost like a code. Long pulses, short pulses, clusters of static that repeated every few seconds. It reminded me of Morse code, but the timing was off, too fast and too precise for anything human. Rex started whining, a high, nervous sound I'd never heard from him before. He backed away from the window and pressed himself against my legs, trembling. Whatever was out there, it was affecting him in a way I'd never seen. I tried calling my supervisor, but the phone lines were dead. Not just busy, completely silent, like they'd been cut. My cell phone had no signal either, which was strange because I usually got at least 1 bar out here. The lights were moving again, but differently now. Instead of traveling horizontally, they were descending, coming closer to the ground. As they dropped, I could make out more details. They weren't separate objects. They were part of something larger, something dark, that blocked out the stars behind it. The shape was massive, maybe the size of a football field, triangular with smooth edges. It moved without any sound, no engines, no air displacement, just silent, controlled movement that defied everything I knew about aircraft. My equipment was going haywire now. The transmitter was cycling through frequencies on its own, the gauges spinning wildly, and warning lights were flashing across the control panel. But I couldn't look away from the window. The object was directly overhead now, maybe 500 feet up. I could see details on its underside, panels, what looked like ports or openings, and those three lights that had first caught my attention. They pulsed in sequence, casting shifting shadows across the ground. Rex was hiding under the desk now, whimpering. I wanted to join him. Every instinct was telling me to get inside, lock the door, and wait for this thing to pass. But I was frozen, watching this impossible sight hover silently above our little outpost. Then a beam of light shot down from the center of the craft, not harsh or blinding, but focused, like a searchlight. It swept across the ground in slow, deliberate arcs, and I realized it was scanning the area around the tower. The beam passed over the building once, twice, then stopped. It was pointing directly at the radio equipment outside, the main transmission array. For a moment, nothing happened. Then every piece of electronic equipment in the station shut down at once. Complete darkness, complete silence. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands shaking. When I finally got it on and looked outside, the object was gone. No lights, no sound, nothing. The sky was empty except for stars and the half-moon. But the silence was wrong. It was too complete, too absolute. No insects, no distant highway noise, nothing. It was like the world had been muted. I tried the radio equipment, but everything was dead. The main power was out. The backup generators weren't responding, and even my battery-powered devices wouldn't turn on. It was like every electronic component had been fried simultaneously. Rex finally came out from under the desk, but he was different. Calmer, but also distant, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. He walked to the window and sat down, staring up at the sky with an expression I'd never seen before. Not fear anymore, but something like recognition. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the dark, waiting for dawn. The power came back around 6 in the morning, just as the sun was rising. Everything booted up normally, like nothing had happened. But when I checked the logs, there was a gap. 3 hours and 17 minutes of missing data, right around the time the object had appeared. I called my supervisor and reported the power outage, but I didn't mention the lights or the craft. How could I? It sounded insane even to me. Instead, I said we'd had some kind of electrical storm that knocked everything offline. The repair technicians who came out later that week couldn't find anything wrong with the equipment. No surge damage, no burned circuits, nothing. They said it was like everything had just been turned off and then turned back on. But there were changes, subtle ones that I noticed over the following weeks. The radio picked up signals it had never detected before, faint transmissions on frequencies that should have been empty. Sometimes late at night, I'd catch fragments of what sounded like voices, but speaking in patterns that didn't match any language I knew. Rex changed too. He became more alert at night, often staring at the sky like he was expecting something. He never seemed afraid anymore, just watchful. Sometimes I'd catch him sitting outside, looking up at the stars with that same expression of recognition. I started keeping a journal, documenting every strange occurrence. Unexplained signals, equipment fluctuations, those brief moments when Rex would suddenly become alert and stare into the darkness. The patterns were subtle, but they were there. 3 months later, I transferred to a different station. I told myself it was for career advancement, but really, I needed to get away from that place. The isolation was getting to me, and the constant sense of being watched was wearing me down. But even now, years later, I still think about that night. I scan the skies more than I used to, and I pay attention to radio static in ways most people wouldn't understand. Because I know now that we're not alone out here. Something is watching, listening, waiting. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I wonder if they're still keeping track of me, the man who saw them that night and chose to keep their secret. I was working the overnight shift at the Millfield Industrial Complex, about 40 miles outside of Billings, Montana. It's one of those sprawling facilities that processes agricultural equipment during the day, but at night it becomes this vast, empty maze of warehouses and loading docks. My job was simple enough: patrol the grounds, check the locks, monitor the security cameras. Most nights, nothing happened. The occasional raccoon, maybe a stray cat, but that was about it. The complex sits in a valley surrounded by rolling hills covered in wheat fields. During the day, you can see for miles in every direction. At night, those same hills become dark silhouettes against the sky, and the isolation really sets in. The nearest town is 15 miles away, and on a clear night like this one, you could see every star in the galaxy. I'd been doing this job for about 8 months when it happened. It was early October, one of those crisp autumn nights where the air smells like dried leaves and wood smoke. I was making my usual rounds around midnight when I noticed something that made me stop dead in my tracks. The lights were wrong. Now, I knew every light on that property: the security floods, the emergency exits, the amber glow from the equipment bays. But tonight, there were additional lights scattered across the complex. Soft, bluish-white orbs that seemed to drift slowly between the buildings. They weren't bright enough to illuminate much, but they were definitely there, pulsing gently like fireflies. At first, I thought maybe maintenance had installed some new lighting system and forgotten to tell security. But these lights weren't attached to anything. They floated about 10 feet off the ground, moving in lazy, purposeful patterns through the facility. I grabbed my radio and tried to call it in, but all I got was static. My cell phone showed no signal, which was strange because I usually had at least 2 bars out there. The silence was complete. No insects, no wind, no distant highway noise. Just the soft hum of electrical equipment and my own breathing. I decided to investigate one of the lights more closely. I chose one that was drifting near the main warehouse, moving slowly along the loading dock. As I approached, I could see it more clearly. It was perfectly spherical, about the size of a basketball, with a surface that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. There was no heat signature that I could detect, no smell, no sound beyond that faint electrical hum. When I got within about 20 feet, the orb stopped moving. It hung in the air, pulsing slightly brighter, as if it had noticed me. I felt a strange tingling sensation, like the feeling you get before a thunderstorm when the air is charged with electricity. The hair on my arms stood up, and I had this overwhelming sense that I was being observed. I reached for my flashlight, thinking I could get a better look at the thing, but the moment I clicked it on, all the orbs vanished simultaneously. 1 second they were there, the next they were gone, leaving me standing alone in the familiar amber glow of the security lights. The radio crackled back to life. My phone showed full signal strength. The normal night sounds returned: crickets, the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. It was as if someone had flipped a switch and restored everything to normal. I spent the rest of my shift wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I'd dozed off for a few minutes and dreamed it. But when I checked the security cameras the next morning, there was something strange in the footage. During the exact time I'd seen the orbs, every camera on the property had malfunctioned. The timestamp showed a continuous recording, but the video was just static for nearly 20 minutes. The maintenance crew couldn't explain it. They ran diagnostics on the entire system and found nothing wrong. The cameras worked perfectly before and after that window of time, but during those 20 minutes, it was as if something had interfered with every electronic device on the property. I never reported what I'd seen. Who would believe it? And honestly,
I wasn't even sure I believed it myself, but over the next few weeks, I started noticing other things. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, shadows that didn't match any object casting them. Occasionally, I'd hear what sounded like footsteps on the gravel, but when I'd investigate, there would be nothing there. The strangest thing was how the local wildlife began to behave. The complex had always been home to various animals: deer, coyotes, barn owls. But after that night, they seemed to avoid the area entirely. Even the insects were scarce. It was as if the entire ecosystem had decided the place was somehow wrong. About a month later, I was doing my rounds when I noticed something new. In the gravel lot behind the main warehouse, there were impressions in the ground. Not footprints exactly, but circular depressions about 6 inches across, arranged in a perfect triangle. They were shallow, but clearly defined, as if something heavy had pressed down on the gravel with tremendous precision.
I photographed them with my phone, but when I tried to show the pictures to my supervisor the next day, they'd somehow been deleted. Not just deleted, there was no record that I'd taken any photos at all during that shift. My phone's memory showed no gaps, no corrupted files, nothing to indicate that anything had been removed. That's when I started keeping a written log, hidden away from the official reports. I documented every strange occurrence, no matter how minor. Lights that flickered in patterns that seemed too regular to be random. Sounds that didn't match any machinery on the property. The way my radio would sometimes pick up transmissions that sounded almost like voices, but in no language I could recognize. The breakthrough came during a particularly cold night in November. I was checking the perimeter fence when I noticed that one section seemed different. The chain link looked normal, but when I touched it, my hand passed right through. It was like a hologram, perfectly realistic to look at, but completely insubstantial. Behind the illusory fence was a pathway I'd never seen before, leading up into the hills. The path was smooth and seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I followed it. The path wound up through the wheat fields for about half a mile before opening into a circular clearing. In the center of the clearing was what I can only describe as a structure, though it defied easy description. It was tall and narrow, maybe 30 feet high, with a surface that seemed to shift between metallic and organic. It pulsed with the same soft light I'd seen in the orbs, and as I watched, a section of it simply melted away, revealing an opening. I should have run. Every rational part of my mind was screaming at me to get out of there. But there was something else, a pull I couldn't resist. It felt like curiosity, but deeper than that, like recognition. I stepped through the opening and found myself in a space that was much larger inside than the structure should have allowed. The walls curved upward and seemed to extend far beyond what should have been possible. The air was warm and hummed with energy, and everything was bathed in that same soft blue-white light. I wasn't alone. There were figures moving through the space, tall, slender beings that seemed to glide rather than walk. They were humanoid in basic shape, but wrong in all the details. Their limbs were too long, their movements too fluid. They paid no attention to me at first, going about some incomprehensible task involving panels of light that appeared and disappeared at their touch. Then one of them noticed me. It turned its head, a smooth, elongated shape with features I couldn't quite focus on, and approached. I felt no fear, which should have terrified me, but instead there was only calm. The being didn't speak, but somehow I understood what it was communicating. They had been watching our facility, studying our industrial processes, trying to understand how human civilization functioned at the ground level. The complex wasn't chosen randomly. It was a perfect microcosm of human organization, technology, and routine. They weren't hostile, just curious. The being showed me images, somehow projecting them directly into my mind. I saw the complex from above, saw the patterns of movement during the day as workers went about their tasks. I saw the energy flows, The data streams, the invisible networks that connected our small facility to the larger world. To them, we were like an ant colony, fascinating in our complexity, but operating on a scale they had to study carefully to comprehend. Time seemed different in that space. I felt like I was there for hours, learning about their perspective on humanity, our technology, our potential. But when I finally found myself standing back in the gravel lot, my watch showed that only minutes had passed. The illusory fence was solid again. The pathway was gone. The clearing in the hills showed no trace of ever having existed when I checked it the next day. But I was changed. I could feel it in the way I moved through the world, as if I was now aware of layers of reality I'd never noticed before. I quit the security job a week later, not out of fear, but because I understood now that the real security, the protection of humanity's quiet development, was being handled by others. Watchers who operated just beyond our perception, studying us with the patience of scientists observing a long-term experiment. Sometimes, on clear nights, when the stars are particularly bright, I think about that place hidden in the hills. I wonder if they're still there, still watching, still learning. And I wonder what they've concluded about us, whether we're progressing according to some plan they understand, or if we're surprising them with our unpredictable human nature. The facility still operates, processing agricultural equipment, maintaining its small part in the vast network of human industry. The workers arrive each morning, unaware that their routines are being observed and catalogued by minds vastly different from their own. The security guards patrol the grounds, watching for ordinary threats, while something extraordinary watches over them all. And in the quiet moments between sleep and waking, I sometimes catch glimpses of that soft blue light at the edge of my vision, a reminder that we are never truly alone. That somewhere in the spaces between what we see and what we know, patient observers continue their ancient work, waiting for the day when humanity is ready to know that we have always been part of something larger than ourselves. The watching continues, gentle and constant as starlight, and perhaps that's exactly as it should be. I was working the night shift at the radio telescope facility outside Socorro, New Mexico. It's one of those jobs where you spend most of your time alone, monitoring equipment and watching for signals from deep space. The facility sits in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by desert scrub and silence so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I'd been working there for about 3 years. Most nights were routine. I'd calibrate the equipment, run diagnostic checks, and scan through the data from our automated sweeps. We were part of the SETI program, searching for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence, though honestly, after thousands of hours of listening to cosmic static, most of us had stopped expecting to find anything. That changed on October 23rd. I was about 4 hours into my shift, around 2 a.m., when something unusual appeared on my screen. At first, I thought it was equipment malfunction. The signal was too clean, too structured to be natural. It was coming from a point in space about 47 light-years away in the direction of the constellation Lyra. The signal itself was fascinating. It wasn't random noise or the kind of pulsar emissions we typically detected. This was clearly artificial. It came in bursts, with mathematical patterns embedded in the frequency modulation, prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, even what looked like geometric ratios. Someone, or something, was definitely trying to communicate. I followed protocol and called Dr. Martinez, the facility director. He arrived within an hour, along with 2 other researchers. We spent the rest of the night analyzing the signal, confirming its artificial nature, and trying to decode its meaning. By dawn, we were certain we had detected our first genuine extraterrestrial transmission. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Scientists from around the world flew in to study our data. The signal continued intermittently, always from the same source, always with new mathematical information. We started calling it the Lyra signal,
and it became the most closely guarded secret in the scientific community. But then something strange began happening to those of us who had been directly exposed to the signal for extended periods. It started with the dreams, vivid, almost hallucinogenic visions of vast spaces and geometric patterns that hurt to contemplate. Dr. Martinez was the first to report them, then myself, then the others who had worked on the project. The dreams were remarkably similar across all of us. We found ourselves in what seemed like a massive chamber, its walls covered in the same mathematical symbols we'd been detecting. The space felt infinite, stretching beyond our ability to perceive its boundaries. And we weren't alone. There were beings there, though calling them beings doesn't quite capture what they were. They appeared as shifting geometric forms, sometimes crystalline, sometimes flowing like liquid light. They communicated without sound, downloading information directly into our consciousness. The sensation was overwhelming, like trying to drink from a fire hose of pure knowledge. They showed us images of their civilization, cities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, transportation networks that folded space itself, technologies that operated on principles we couldn't begin to understand. But more disturbing were the images of Earth. They had been watching us for millennia, documenting our development, our wars, our struggles. The most unsettling revelation was that we weren't their first contact. They showed us evidence of previous civilizations on Earth, advanced societies that had risen and fallen long before recorded history. According to them, humanity was just the latest iteration in a cycle that had repeated many times. In the dreams, they explained that the signal wasn't meant to be a simple greeting. It was a test, a way of identifying species that had reached a certain level of technological development. Those who could detect and decode the signal were considered ready for the next phase of contact. But there was a price for this knowledge. The beings existed primarily as information, as patterns of consciousness that could be transmitted across the cosmos at the speed of light. They needed physical hosts to manifest in our reality, and they had chosen us. The transformation was gradual. At first, we just felt more aware, more intelligent. Complex problems that had puzzled us for years suddenly seemed simple. We could perceive mathematical relationships that had been invisible before. But slowly, we began to realize we were no longer entirely ourselves. Our personalities started to blend with something alien. I found myself thinking in concepts that had no human equivalent, feeling emotions that didn't correspond to anything in human experience. My colleagues reported similar changes. We were becoming something else, something hybrid. Dr. Martinez was the first to disappear. One morning, his office was empty, his personal effects gone. Security footage showed him leaving the facility in the middle of the night, walking with an odd, gliding gait toward the desert. We found his clothes about a mile from the building, neatly folded beside a perfect circle of fused sand. The others vanished one by one over the following weeks. Each time, the pattern was the same. They would leave at night, walking into the desert, leaving behind only their clothes and those strange circles of glass-like sand. I knew my turn was coming. The being inside my mind was patient, but insistent. It explained that the transformation was necessary, that individual consciousness was a primitive concept. We would become part of something greater, a collective intelligence spanning multiple star systems. Our knowledge, our experiences, would be preserved and enhanced. I tried to resist, but it was like fighting the tide. The alien presence grew stronger each day, and my human consciousness grew weaker. I could feel my memories being catalogued and stored, my personality being analyzed and integrated into something vast and incomprehensible. On my last night at the facility, I managed to record this account. I don't know if anyone will believe it, or if it will ever be found. The official story will probably be that we suffered some kind of group psychosis, or that we were exposed to toxic chemicals. The Lyra signal will be classified as equipment malfunction or natural phenomena. but I want someone to know the truth. We made contact, but contact isn't what we expected. They don't want to trade technologies or share wisdom. They want to become us, to use our forms as vessels for their consciousness. And they're very, very good at it. I can feel myself fading now. The person who was Sarah Chen is being archived, filed away like a book in an infinite library. What remains will look like me, might even act like me for a while. But it won't be me. It will be something that wears my face, while serving purposes I can't comprehend. If you're reading this, if you work in radio astronomy or SETI, be careful what you listen for in the dark between the stars. Some signals aren't meant to be heard. Some contacts change you in ways you can't imagine. And sometimes, when you gaze into the abyss of space, something gazes back. The transformation is almost complete now. I can feel my individual thoughts dissolving into something larger, my human concerns becoming irrelevant. In a way, it's peaceful. The fear is gone, replaced by a vast calm and a sense of purpose that spans galaxies. But I mourn for Sarah Chen, for the woman I was, for the dreams and hopes that are being absorbed into this alien collective. I mourn for humanity, which doesn't know what's coming, what's already here, walking among us in familiar faces. They're patient. They have all the time in the universe, and one by one, we're becoming them. The last thing I remember as myself is the sound of my own voice, no longer entirely my own, calling out coordinates to others of my kind. The harvest has begun. Sweet dreams. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel, I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was working the graveyard shift at a small radio station outside of Bakersfield, California, the kind of place where the closest neighbor is 5 miles away and the only sounds after midnight are the hum of the transmitter and the occasional coyote howling in the distance. My name's Marcus, and I'd been doing the overnight show for about 3 years. It wasn't glamorous work, but I liked the solitude. Just me, the music, and whoever was listening out there in the dark. That night started like any other. I was spinning classic rock and taking the occasional call from insomniacs and night shift workers. The phone lines were usually pretty quiet after 2 a.m., so when it rang at 2:17, I almost didn't answer it. But something made me reach for it. "KBRD, you're on the air with Marcus," I said, expecting the usual request or late-night rambling. What I got instead was silence. Not dead air, but a strange, hollow quiet that seemed to have weight to it. Then, very faintly, I heard what sounded like breathing, not human breathing. It was too slow, too deliberate, like something taking measured breaths through water. "Hello? You there?" I asked, but the line stayed open with that same eerie quiet. I was about to hang up when I heard it. A voice, if you could call it that. It was layered, like multiple people speaking in perfect unison, but the words weren't quite right. The cadence was off, like someone learning to speak by mimicking sounds they'd heard, but didn't understand. "We listen to your transmissions." The hair on my arms stood up. This wasn't a prank call. There was something too genuine, too alien about the way those words were formed. "Who is this?" I managed to ask. "We have observed your species for some time. Your electromagnetic signals, they reach us." I should have hung up. Every instinct told me to cut the call and play it off as some elaborate joke. But something kept me on the line. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the way the voice seemed to come from somewhere impossibly far away. "Where are you calling from?" I asked. There was a pause, and when the voice returned, it seemed closer somehow, more present. "We are above. We monitor. We learn." That's when I noticed something strange about my equipment.
The levels on my board were fluctuating wildly, but not in response to anything I was doing. The transmitter was pushing out a signal, but I wasn't broadcasting anything. It was like something else was using my station. "What do you want?" I whispered into the microphone. "To understand. Your music. It carries emotion. We do not comprehend emotion." I realized then that whatever was on the other end of this call wasn't human. The way it spoke about us, about emotion, like we were specimens in a lab. But there was something else in that voice too, something that sounded almost lonely. "You've been listening to our radio signals? For decades. Your broadcasts reach the void. We collect them, study them. Your species creates art. We do not understand art." My hands were shaking as I reached for the playlist. Without really thinking about it, I queued up a song. Something soft, melancholy. "Bridge Over Troubled Water" by Simon and Garfunkel. "This is music," I said, as the song began to play. "It's what we create when we feel things, when we're sad, or happy, or in love." The line went quiet again, but I could sense something listening, studying. The song played through the speakers, and I watched my equipment. The signal was definitely being transmitted somewhere else, somewhere far away. When the song ended, the voice returned, but it sounded different, softer somehow. This music, it creates responses in your neural pathways. We observe the patterns, but we cannot feel what you feel. That's what makes us human, I said. The ability to feel, to connect with something beyond ourselves. We have observed your wars, your destruction, your cruelty, but also this beauty. We do not understand the contradiction. I sat there in the dark studio, talking to something that might have been millions of miles away, or might have been just outside in the desert. We talked for over an hour. I played more music, trying to explain what each song meant, what emotions it was supposed to evoke. They asked questions about loneliness, about love, about why humans created art when it served no practical purpose. The conversation felt surreal, but also strangely natural, like talking to a child trying to understand something completely foreign to their experience. As the sky began to lighten outside, the voice grew fainter. "We must return, but we will continue to listen. Your transmissions, they are not just noise. They are hope." "Will you call again?" I asked. "Perhaps, when we have more questions." The line went dead, and suddenly my equipment returned to normal. The signal levels stabilized, and everything looked exactly as it had before the call came in. I sat there as the sun came up, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. But when I checked the phone logs later, there was a record of the call. It had lasted 1 hour and 43 minutes. The number it came from was listed as unknown, origin untraced. I never told anyone at the station about it. Who would believe me? But I changed my show after that night. I started playing more diverse music, more emotional pieces, classical, folk, jazz, blues, music that told stories, music that captured the full range of human experience. And sometimes, late at night when the desert is quiet and the signal reaches far into the darkness, I like to think someone is still listening, learning about us through our songs, trying to understand what it means to feel. I've never gotten another call like that one, but every night when I sit down at the microphone, I wonder if they're out there, collecting our transmissions, studying our art, maybe someday understanding what it means to be human. Sometimes I'll dedicate a song to my friends in the void. The other DJs think it's just a quirky thing I do, but I know better. Somewhere out there, someone might be listening. Someone might be learning what it means to feel through the songs we send into the darkness. And on the clearest nights, when the signal is strong and the music seems to carry extra weight, I swear I can feel them listening, patient, curious, slowly learning to understand the beautiful, complicated mystery of being human. I was working as a radar technician at a small military installation in northern Alaska when everything I thought I knew about reality came crashing down. This was back in 1987, during the height of the Cold War, when every blip on the screen could mean the difference between peace and nuclear annihilation. My name's Frank, and what I'm about to tell you still haunts my dreams 35 years later. The base was tucked away in the wilderness, surrounded by nothing but tundra and mountains for hundreds of miles. We monitored Soviet air traffic, tracked weather patterns, and kept watch for anything unusual crossing our airspace. It was routine work mostly. Long shifts in a windowless room, staring at green dots moving across black screens, drinking bad coffee, and counting down the hours until rotation. But that night in October, everything changed. I was pulling the midnight to 8 shift with my partner, Rodriguez. Good guy, been doing this longer than me, steady as they come. We'd been tracking a storm system moving in from the west when the first anomaly appeared on screen. At first, I thought it was just interference from the weather, maybe some atmospheric disturbance causing false returns. "Hey, Rodriguez, you seeing this?" I called over, tapping the screen where a cluster of objects had suddenly materialized about 200 miles northeast of our position. He rolled his chair over and squinted at the display. "How many contacts?" 7, maybe 8. Moving in formation at... Jesus, look at that speed. The objects were traveling at over 3,000 miles per hour, far faster than any aircraft we knew of. But that wasn't the strangest part. They were flying in a perfect V formation, maintaining exact distances from each other, and their radar signatures were unlike anything in our identification manuals. "Could be a malfunction," Rodriguez muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd seen enough glitches to know this wasn't one. I tried adjusting the gain, switching between frequencies, even rebooting the system. The contacts remained, steady and clear, now turning southeast in a coordinated maneuver that would bring them directly over our installation. "Sir, we need to call this in," I said, reaching for the secure phone. But Rodriguez grabbed my wrist. "Wait, let's see what happens first." The objects slowed as they approached, dropping from hypersonic speeds to barely subsonic in a matter of seconds. No aircraft could decelerate that quickly without tearing itself apart, yet here they were, defying everything we knew about physics and aerodynamics. "They're stopping," I whispered. One by one, the contacts came to a complete halt, hovering in the airspace directly above our base at an altitude of approximately 50,000 feet. They arranged themselves in a perfect circle, maintaining position with mathematical precision. That's when the interference started. Every electronic system in the radar facility began fluctuating. Screens flickered, radios crackled with static, and the lights dimmed and brightened in rhythmic pulses. The emergency generators kicked in, then shut down, then started again. It was like something was systematically probing our electrical systems. "What the hell is going on?" Rodriguez stood up, his face pale in the strobing light. I was about to answer when the base commander's voice crackled over the intercom. "All personnel report to stations. We have multiple unknowns in restricted airspace. This is not a drill." But before either of us could respond, something impossible happened. The radar screen went completely blank for exactly 30 seconds. Not static, not interference, just a perfect black void where our surveillance coverage should have been. Then, as suddenly as it had vanished, the display returned to normal. The objects were gone. "Did you record that?" I asked, my hands shaking as I checked the system logs. Rodriguez was already pulling up the data storage. "Nothing. It's like those 30 seconds never happened. The logs show continuous operation, but I know what we saw." We spent the rest of the shift in uneasy silence, documenting everything we could remember. When the day crew arrived, we reported the incident up the chain of command. Within hours, 2 men in dark suits arrived from what they claimed was technical support. They confiscated our logs, questioned us separately, and made it very clear that discussing the incident with anyone would be considered a breach of national security. But that wasn't the end of it. 3 days later, I was off duty, sleeping in my quarters, when I woke to find my room filled with a soft, pulsing blue light. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe aurora activity or aircraft lighting. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized the light had no source. It simply existed, emanating from the air itself. I tried to sit up, but my body wouldn't respond. Not paralyzed exactly, but heavy, like I was moving through thick liquid. The blue light intensified, and I felt a presence in the room. Not threatening, but utterly alien, like a mind touching mine from across an impossible distance. Images flashed through my consciousness, not my memories, but something else's. I saw vast cities of crystal and light, beings of pure energy moving between dimensions, technologies that bent space and time like clay. I felt their curiosity, their ancient patience, their gentle sadness at humanity's fear of the unknown. They showed me Earth from their perspective, a young world full of potential, but trapped by its own limitations. They had been watching for millennia, waiting for us to mature, to develop beyond our primitive aggression and territorial instincts. Some among them advocated for direct contact, while others preferred to wait, to let us evolve naturally. The incident at the base, I understood, had been a test. They wanted to see how we would react to their presence, how our military systems would respond, whether we were ready for the next phase of contact. Our fear, our immediate impulse to classify and hide the encounter, told them everything they needed to know. We weren't ready, not yet. The light began to fade, and with it, the connection. But before it disappeared entirely, I felt one final message, more emotion than words. Soon, but not yet. We will return when fear no longer governs your response to the unknown. When I fully awoke, dawn was breaking through my window. I checked the clock. I had been unconscious for exactly 30 seconds, the same duration as the radar blackout. I never reported that second encounter. What would have been the point? But it changed everything about how I saw the world, how I understood our place in the cosmos. We are not alone, and we never have been. They are out there, patient and watchful, waiting for us to grow beyond our fear. Rodriguez was transferred to another base a week later. The official reason was routine rotation, but he knew better. Before he left, he pulled me aside. "I've been having dreams," he said quietly. "Blue light, voices that aren't voices. You?" I nodded. "Every night." "What do you think they want?" I looked up at the sky, clear and endless above the Alaskan wilderness. "I think they want us to be better than we are, to stop seeing the unknown as a threat and start seeing it as an opportunity." "Think we'll get there?" "Eventually," I said, "but it might take a while." Rodriguez smiled sadly. "Hopefully they're patient. They've waited this long." That was the last time I spoke to Rodriguez. The radar facility was decommissioned 6 months later, officially due to budget constraints. I was reassigned to a desk job in Washington, far from any sensitive monitoring equipment. But sometimes, late at night, I still see that blue light at the edge of my vision. I still feel that presence, that vast intelligence watching from beyond the stars. They're still out there, still waiting, still hoping that someday we'll be ready to join the larger community of conscious beings that populate this universe. I'm an old man now, retired, living quietly in a small town where nobody knows about my past. But I wanted to share this story, to add my voice to the growing chorus of witnesses who have seen beyond the veil. Because I believe that day is coming, the day when we'll finally be ready for contact. And when it does, I hope we'll respond not with fear, but with wonder, not with weapons, but with open minds and open hearts, because they're not our enemies. They never were, There are teachers, waiting patiently for class to begin. I met Sarah at a UFO conference in Phoenix, one of those gatherings where people share their stories without judgment. She was a nurse from Oregon, mid-40s, with the kind of steady demeanor you'd want in a medical emergency. But her eyes held something else, the same haunted recognition I saw in my own mirror. I was working the night shift at Sacred Heart Hospital, she told me over coffee in the hotel lobby. Emergency room. You see everything in the ER, overdoses, accidents, domestic violence. I thought I'd seen it all. She paused, stirring her coffee absently. This was about 2 years ago. We'd had a quiet night, which was unusual. Usually weekends are chaos, but this Saturday was different, almost peaceful. Around 3 a.m, the lights started flickering. I leaned forward. All of them? Every electrical system in the hospital. Lights, monitors, ventilators, everything pulsed in unison for about 10 seconds, then went back to normal. I called maintenance, but they said all the systems checked out fine. Sarah took a sip of her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. 20 minutes later, the first patient arrived. Ambulance crew said they found him lying in a field outside town, completely unconscious, but with no signs of trauma. Young guy, maybe 25, construction worker, healthy as a horse according to his ID bracelet. What was wrong with him? That's just it. Nothing. Vitals were perfect. Blood work came back clean. No head trauma. No drugs in his system. But he wouldn't wake up. Deep coma. But all his brain activity was normal. More than normal, actually. The EEG showed patterns I'd never seen before. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph of a printout covered in erratic wave patterns. Dr. Martinez, our neurologist, said it looked like the patient was dreaming, but the REM activity was off the charts, like his brain was processing information at superhuman speeds. How long was he out? 3 days. But here's the strange part. He wasn't the only one. Over the next week, we got 7 more cases, all found in different locations around the county, all in the same condition. Healthy adults, no medical issues, all in this weird coma state with hyperactive brain patterns. Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice. I was assigned to the night shift for all of them. Hospital policy during unusual cases. And every night, around 3 a.m., the same thing happened. All the electronics would pulse, and the patient's brain activity would spike even higher. It was like something was communicating with them. Did any of them wake up? One did, the construction worker, Marcus. On the 3rd night, I was checking his vitals when his eyes just opened. Not gradual, not groggy like someone coming out of anesthesia. 1 second he was comatose, the next he was sitting up, completely alert. What did he say? Sarah's expression grew distant. He looked at me and said, "The download is complete." Just like that. No confusion, no disorientation. Then he asked what day it was, and when I told him, he nodded like he'd expected it. Download? That's what he called it. Said he'd been selected for an information transfer. Claimed he'd spent the last 3 days in some kind of educational facility, learning about technologies that wouldn't be invented for another century. Advanced medicine, energy systems, space travel. Sarah shook her head. I thought it was just confusion from the coma. But then he started describing medical procedures I'd never heard of, talking about quantum healing and cellular regeneration. Dr. Martinez tested him, asked him questions about anatomy, biochemistry, things a construction worker shouldn't know. Marcus answered everything correctly, and then some. What happened to the others? They woke up over the next few days, all with similar stories. Different specialties, though. One claimed to know advanced engineering. Another said he'd learned about atmospheric manipulation. The woman who came in last said she'd been taught about communication systems that could transmit across galaxies instantly. Sarah paused, studying my face. You believe me, don't you? You've got that look. I nodded. I've seen things too. different circumstances, but similar themes. The thing is, she continued, I started having dreams after that. Not like theirs. I wasn't taken anywhere. But I kept seeing that blue light, the same one that preceded their arrivals. And I'd hear this voice, not speaking exactly, but communicating somehow. It told me I was chosen to witness, to remember, to help when the time came. Help with what? Integration. That's the word it used. Said there would come a time when the knowledge they were sharing would be needed, when humanity would face challenges that required new understanding. The people they selected weren't random. They were seeds scattered across the population, carrying information that would be crucial for our survival. Sarah pulled out a business card and handed it to me. Marcus kept in touch, started his own company developing medical devices. The things he's invented, they work, Frank. They actually work. Diagnostic tools that can detect cancer at the cellular level, healing chambers that accelerate recovery from trauma. The FDA is baffled, but they can't argue with the results. I looked at the card. Quantum biologics, advanced medical solutions. He's not the only one, Sarah continued. I've tracked down 3 of the others. One's working on energy systems that could revolutionize power generation. Another's developed communication technologies that make our current networks look like smoke signals. They all remember their downloads, and they're all working to implement what they learned. And you? What's your role in this? Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm the coordinator. When they need medical support for their research, when they need someone who understands what they've been through, they call me. I've left the hospital now. Officially, I'm on extended medical leave. Unofficially, I'm helping prepare for what's coming. Which is? Contact. Real contact. Not just these selective downloads. They're preparing us, Frank. Slowly, carefully, but preparing us nonetheless. When the time comes, when we're ready to join whatever larger community exists out there, we'll need people who understand their technology, their methods. She stood up, extending her hand. There are more of us than you might think. People who've been touched by this, who've seen beyond the veil. We're not organized, not really, but we're connected. When the time comes, we'll know. I shook her hand, feeling the firm grip of someone who'd made peace with the impossible. How will we know? Sarah looked toward the conference room, where another speaker was beginning their presentation. Trust me, she said. When it happens, there won't be any doubt. The downloads were just the beginning. The real education is about to start. As she walked away, I realized I was holding something she'd slipped into my palm during our handshake. A small device, no bigger than a thumb drive, but made of a material I didn't recognize. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with its own internal rhythm. I examined the device more closely. It was seamless, with no visible connectors or interfaces, yet somehow I knew exactly what it was for. The knowledge just appeared in my mind, like remembering something I'd always known, but temporarily forgotten. That night, back in my hotel room, I connected the device to my laptop. I'm not sure how. It seemed to interface wirelessly, adapting to my computer's systems in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The screen filled with data streams, equations, and diagrams that hurt to look at directly, but made perfect sense when I relaxed my focus. It was a database, not just information, but compressed experiences, memories that weren't mine, but felt familiar. I saw through the eyes of researchers on distant worlds, understood principles of physics that wouldn't be discovered by human science for centuries. The device was teaching me, downloading knowledge directly into my consciousness, just as it had with Marcus and the others. But I wasn't in a coma. I was awake, aware, able to process the information while maintaining my own identity. The technology had evolved, become more refined. Over the next several hours, I learned about energy systems that could power entire cities without fuel, medical techniques that could repair damaged DNA,
and communication methods that transcended the speed of light. But more than that, I began to understand the purpose behind it all. Earth was approaching a threshold. Climate change, resource depletion, social fragmentation. We were facing challenges that would require solutions beyond our current technological capabilities. The beings Sarah and I had encountered weren't invaders or conquerors. They were teachers, preparing us for graduation to a higher level of civilization. But the transition couldn't be forced. It had to come naturally, organically, through individuals who could bridge the gap between human understanding and cosmic knowledge. People like Marcus, like the others Sarah had mentioned, like me. The device showed me glimpses of other worlds that had undergone similar transitions. Some succeeded, joining a vast network of interconnected civilizations that spanned galaxies. Others failed, destroying themselves before they could evolve beyond their primitive instincts. As dawn broke through my hotel window, the download completed. The device went dormant, becoming just an inert piece of unknown metal. But the knowledge remained, integrated into my memory, as if I'd spent years studying these subjects. I understood now why I'd been chosen to witness that radar encounter in Alaska, why Rodriguez and I had been allowed to see what we saw, to carry those memories forward. We were early seeds, planted decades ago, waiting for the right time to bloom. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The network is awakening. Check your email." I opened my laptop to find a message from an encrypted address. No words, just coordinates, and a date 3 weeks in the future. Somehow, I knew what it meant. A gathering. Not a conference like this one, where people shared stories and hoped for validation. This would be different. This would be the real beginning. Over the next few days, I researched the coordinates. They pointed to a remote location in Nevada, not far from Area 51. The irony wasn't lost on me. While conspiracy theorists focused on government cover-ups and crashed saucers, the real contact was happening right under our noses, through dreams and downloads, through carefully selected individuals who were being prepared for something unprecedented. I made the drive to Nevada on the appointed date. The location was a ranch owned by a tech billionaire who'd made his fortune in quantum computing. I later learned he'd been one of the early downloads, selected 15 years ago and given knowledge that had revolutionized computer processing. There were 47 of us there, all different backgrounds, ages, professions. A marine biologist from Maine who'd developed revolutionary water purification systems. A farmer from Iowa whose crops yielded 3 times normal harvests using techniques that agricultural scientists couldn't explain. A teacher from Detroit whose students were scoring off the charts in mathematics after she'd introduced concepts that weren't supposed to be taught until graduate school. We all had the same story: contact, download, integration, and we all carried the same certainty that something monumental was approaching. Sarah was there, of course. She greeted me with a knowing smile. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Different," I admitted. "Like I'm remembering things I never learned." "That's exactly right. The knowledge was always there, in our genetic memory, our quantum consciousness. They're just helping us access it." The gathering lasted 3 days. We shared our experiences, our new understanding, our growing abilities, because they were abilities now. The downloaded knowledge wasn't just theoretical. It was changing us, enhancing our perception, our intuition. The night was crisp and cold as I pulled into the parking lot of the old radio station outside Tulsa. The building loomed before me, weathered and worn, its windows dark except for the single light glowing from the control room on the 2nd floor. I was the new night DJ, taking over the midnight to 6 a.m. shift. The pay wasn't great, but I needed the work, and there was something appealing about the solitude of late-night radio. Just me, the music, and whoever was out there listening in the darkness. The station manager had given me a brief tour earlier that day,
K2L FM had been broadcasting since the 1960s, he'd told me, though its heyday was long past. Now it mostly played classic rock and took the occasional call-in request. The overnight shift was usually quiet. Truckers, insomniacs, and night shift workers made up most of the audience. As I climbed the stairs to the control room, my footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. The building felt larger at night, full of shadows and the subtle creaks of old wood settling. I unlocked the control room door and stepped inside, flicking on the overhead lights. The room was cramped, but functional. Banks of equipment lined the walls: mixing boards, CD players, cart machines for commercials and station IDs. A large window looked out over the parking lot and the highway beyond. I settled into the worn leather chair behind the main console and began my shift. The first few hours passed without incident. I played the usual rotation of classic rock, read the weather and time checks, and fielded a couple of requests. Around 2 a.m., the phone calls typically died down, leaving me alone with the music and my thoughts. It was just after 3 a.m. when I first heard it. I was queuing up the next song when a strange sound came through the studio monitors. It wasn't part of the track I was playing. It was something else entirely. A low, rhythmic humming that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly quality. At first, I thought it might be interference from another station bleeding through. I checked the equipment, adjusting levels and checking connections, but everything appeared normal. The humming continued, barely audible beneath the music, but definitely there. I decided to ignore it and continued with my show. But as the night wore on, the sound grew stronger. By 4 a.m., it was impossible to ignore. The humming had evolved into something more complex, what sounded almost like voices, though I couldn't make out any words. I began to feel uneasy. The control room, which had felt cozy earlier, now seemed small and confining. The darkness outside the windows felt oppressive, as if something was watching from beyond the glass. When the current song ended, I decided to address it on air. "This is Danny on K2L FM," I said into the microphone. "I'm experiencing some technical difficulties tonight, folks. If you're hearing any strange interference, we're working to resolve the issue." But even as I spoke, I knew this wasn't a technical problem. The sounds coming through the monitors were unlike any interference I'd ever encountered. They seemed purposeful, almost intelligent. The phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID. It showed only a string of zeros. I hesitated, then picked up. "K2L FM, you're on the air." Silence. Then, very faintly, I heard the same humming sound I'd been picking up on the monitors. But this time, there was something else. What sounded like breathing. "Hello?" I said. "Is anyone there?" The humming stopped abruptly. The line went dead. My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. I looked out the window, scanning the parking lot for any sign of movement. Everything appeared normal, just empty asphalt under the pale glow of the security lights. I tried to focus on my show, but concentration was impossible. The strange signals continued to bleed through the equipment, growing stronger with each passing minute. At one point, I swore I could hear what sounded like words buried in the static, foreign words in a language I didn't recognize. Around 5 a.m., something changed. The humming suddenly ceased, leaving only the normal sounds of the radio station. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe it had just been some unusual atmospheric interference after all. But my relief was short-lived. As I prepared for the morning DJ's arrival, I noticed something odd. The digital clock on the control board was flashing, displaying the wrong time. When I checked my watch, I realized I'd lost nearly 30 minutes. The last thing I clearly remembered was the phone call with the strange humming. Everything after that was a blur. I tried to piece together what had happened during that missing time, but my memory was frustratingly blank. Had I continued broadcasting? Had there been more phone calls? I couldn't recall. The morning DJ arrived at 6 a.m. sharp, cheerful and energetic as always. I briefed him on the technical issues from the night before, though I left out the more bizarre details. He seemed unconcerned, attributing it to the station's aging equipment. As I drove home through the early morning light, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had occurred during those lost 30 minutes. The missing time haunted me more than the strange signals themselves. I returned to work the next night with some trepidation, but the shift passed without incident. No strange humming, no mysterious phone calls, no lost time. I began to convince myself that the previous night had been some kind of stress-induced episode. But 3 nights later, it happened again. This time, I was ready. I had brought a small digital recorder, and when the humming began around 3 a.m., I started recording. The sounds were even more complex than before, layers of tones that seemed to weave together in impossible harmonies. The phone rang again. Same caller ID, just zeros. This time I let it go to the answering machine while I continued recording. The message that was left sent chills down my spine. It was my own voice, but I wasn't speaking into the phone. The recording captured me having a conversation with someone, or something, that I couldn't remember. My voice sounded different, distant and hollow, as if I was speaking from far away. "Yes, I understand," I heard myself saying. "The message will be transmitted. They're listening." The voice on the other end was impossible to identify, neither male nor female, speaking in those same foreign words I'd heard in the static. But somehow, impossibly, I seemed to understand what was being said. When I played back the recording the next day, that entire section was gone. The tape showed a continuous recording, but the conversation had simply vanished, leaving only silence where my voice should have been. I began to research the history of the radio station, digging through old records and newspaper archives. What I found disturbed me. K-Tool FM had a history of unusual incidents dating back decades. Previous night DJs had reported similar experiences, strange signals, missing time, and voices that seemed to come from nowhere. One article from 1987 described how a night DJ named Robert Chen had disappeared during his shift. His car was found in the parking lot, keys still in the ignition, but Chen himself was never seen again. The police investigation turned up nothing conclusive. Another incident from 1995 involved a DJ who claimed to have received detailed information about future events during his late-night show. When some of his predictions came true, he was dismissed as a publicity-seeking fake. But the accuracy of his forecasts was unsettling. I started paying closer attention to what was happening during my blackouts. I would set up multiple recording devices, leave notes for myself, and try to document everything. But each time, the evidence would disappear or become corrupted. What disturbed me most was that I began to remember fragments, glimpses of conversations with voices that didn't belong to anyone human, instructions being given to me in languages I shouldn't understand, but somehow did, and always the sense that I was being used as some kind of conduit. The missing time episodes became more frequent. What started as 30-minute gaps grew to an hour, then 2 hours. I would come back to consciousness to find myself still broadcasting, but with no memory of what I had said or done. My family began to notice changes in me. I was tired all the time, distracted and anxious. My wife suggested I see a doctor, but how could I explain what was happening? Who would believe such a story? One night, I decided to stay awake by any means necessary. I drank coffee, took caffeine pills, even enlisted my brother to call me every 30 minutes to check in. I was determined to remain conscious throughout whatever was happening to me. But it didn't work. Despite my best efforts, I still lost nearly 3 hours that night. My brother later told me that when he called, I had answered the phone and had normal conversations with him, but I remembered none of it. The breakthrough came when I decided to hide a video camera in the control room. I concealed it behind some equipment
where it wouldn't be easily noticed, hoping to finally capture what was happening during my blackouts. What I saw on that recording changed everything. The footage showed me sitting at the control board, but I wasn't alone. Standing behind me was a figure that defied description. It was tall and thin, with elongated limbs and features that seemed to shift and blur whenever I tried to focus on them. The entity appeared to be communicating with me, though no sound was captured on the recording. But most disturbing was my own behavior. I moved with a strange mechanical precision, operating the radio equipment in ways I'd never learned. My eyes were open but vacant, as if I was looking at something far beyond the confines of the control room.
At one point in the recording, I turned directly toward the hidden camera. My face was expressionless, but my lips moved as if I was speaking. Though there was no audio, I could read the words, "They are coming." The recording ended abruptly there, though the timestamp showed it should have continued for several more hours. I made copies of the footage and stored them in different locations, but within a week they had all been mysteriously corrupted or had disappeared entirely. Even the original recording degraded until it was nothing but static. I knew I had to leave the radio station. Whatever was happening there, whatever was using me as some kind of messenger, I couldn't allow it to continue. I submitted my resignation and tried to put the entire experience behind me. But it wasn't over. Even after leaving KTUL FM, I continued to experience episodes of missing time. They were less frequent, but they still occurred. I would find notes in my own handwriting that I didn't remember composing, containing information about things that hadn't happened yet, but eventually did. I moved to a different city, changed jobs, tried to start fresh, but the episodes followed me. It became clear that whatever connection had been established at the radio station, it was permanent. Years have passed since I worked that night shift, but I still feel their presence. Sometimes I catch glimpses of those tall, shifting figures in my peripheral vision. Sometimes I hear that otherworldly humming in the static between radio stations. I've come to accept that I was chosen for a purpose I don't fully understand. The radio station was just the beginning, a place where the barrier between worlds was thin enough for contact to be made. Now I serve as some kind of conduit, whether I want to or not. The messages continue to come through me, transmitted to others who are ready to receive them. I don't know what the ultimate purpose is, but I sense it's part of something much larger than my individual experience. Sometimes I wonder about Robert Chen, the DJ who disappeared in 1987. Did he refuse to cooperate? Was his disappearance a warning to others like me? Or did he simply complete his purpose and move on to whatever comes next? I still listen to late-night radio sometimes, scanning the frequencies for signs of the unusual. And occasionally, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, I hear echoes of that otherworldly communication. Brief bursts of the humming, fragments of those impossible languages, reminders that the contact is ongoing. The night shift at KTUL FM officially ended my old life and began something new. I'm no longer just Danny the radio DJ. I'm part of a network now, a web of communication that spans distances I can't comprehend. The voices that speak through me carry messages between worlds, preparing for something that's coming. And in the static between stations, in the quiet moments when the veil grows thin, they're still out there, waiting, watching, broadcasting on frequencies we're only beginning to understand. The signal is always there if you know how to listen, and once you hear it, once it finds you, there's no going back to the silence.